Good afternoon, everyone. It's just about 4:30, so I think we will get started. I can see we've got lots of lovely people logged on already. Welcome to today's webinar on working with tables and ranges in Excel. I've done a few sound checks in the half an hour leading up to this webinar, so I'm confident that you can all hear me loud and clear. As I mentioned last week, I'm doing it from a different location now with a different internet, so it's always good to know that people can hear me loud and clear. As always, before we begin, I do like to find out where we've got people joining us from today. So in the chat panel, just drop into there where you're calling in from today so I can get jealous at some of the tropical locations. Maybe not Derby, thank you, Jade. Not quite as tropical as we'd like. Mexico, that's a little bit more tropical. There we go. Paris. Oh, lots of people from America as usual. Massachusetts, Trinidad, lovely. Teresa, no, somebody said that they were from Croydon. That's where I'm from. So I'm actually doing this webinar from home, so you might be just around the corner from me. You never know. We've got South Africa, California, LA, Roehampton, wow, all over the place. So nice to have you all with us today. Thank you, guys. Let me just minimize that chat panel down. All right, so I'm going to briefly introduce myself. As always, I know most people on these are regulars and are probably very bored of me doing this every week, but we do sometimes have some new people on. So my name's Deborah Ashby, and I'm an IT trainer and subject matter expert, and I specialise in training Microsoft products, all of them, not just Excel. I think sometimes it seems like I only train Excel, but I, in fact, do all of them. I've been a trainer for quite a long time, almost coming up to 10 years now, and 22 years in the IT industry, both in the UK and in Australia. And I've trained all different kinds of people over the years in many, many different countries. So hopefully that gives me some credentials to sit in front of you today. And the webinar that we're concentrating on today is ranges and tables in Excel. Now, this isn't a huge topic. We might not even go the full hour with this one, and it's quite just a nice topic, but it's a very important topic. Understanding sort of exactly what you can do with ranges and what you can do with tables is fundamental to your understanding of lots of different things in Excel. You'll find that when you do have a good understanding of how these things work and how you can use them, it's really going to increase your efficiency and change the way really that you do things. So I want to start out just by kind of delving into the difference between ranges and tables. And then, of course, as always, we're going to go through some practical live examples. So I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint presentation and just pull up my spreadsheet. All right, hopefully you can all see that okay. Let me just check. Can you just let me know if you can see that spreadsheet okay? Let me pull up my panel. Let's see, sorry. Yes, 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 wonderful. Okay, great. Looks like you can all see. Let me just zoom in very slightly, make that a bit bigger. Okay, so ranges versus tables, what exactly is the difference? Well, they are kind of similar in a way, but there are a couple of fundamental differences. When it comes to ranges, well, any set of data can be considered a range. So if I was to highlight just this bunch of cells just here, that could be considered a range. Or if I was to highlight something in the data here, that could be considered a range. And with this data that I have highlighted just here, that range is given the name of I2 to I8. Hopefully that's a concept that we're all fairly familiar with. And why is that useful? Well, I can use ranges for many different things, but one of the most common ways of using them would be in formulas. So again, this is fairly basic and something you've probably all done previously. If I just do a quick sum calculation, I'm going to type in sum, open my bracket. And if I wanted to sum some of these gross sales cells, the data we have in column G, I could just select the cells I want to sum, close my bracket, and when I hit enter, that's going to give me my answer. Now, what you can see there is it says G2, and then it's got, what do you call that? The the two dots, I can't remember, it's gone from my brain, G2 to G11, and that is your cell range. And really it just means a bunch of cells essentially, or a group of cells. So instead of typing in some G2, G3, G4, G5, so on and so forth, I can shorten that. I can make what I'm typing in a lot shorter just by referencing the cell range as opposed to those individual cells. And when I hit enter, of course, I'm going to get my answer there. Okay, so that's sort of what ranges are, and I'm sure that's probably something you're all fairly familiar with. Now, if we just double click and look at that again, that's all well and good. And on the data that we're using here, we don't have too many calculations going on at the moment, so nothing's particularly confusing. It's quite easy for me to look at that formula and say, oh, okay, G2 to G11, I can see right there what it's summing. However, in some spreadsheets you might use where maybe you have lots and lots and lots of formulas on a worksheet, maybe you look at all of the formulas, it might not be so obvious which data you're referring to just from the cell range. If you have a very large data set, you might have to do a lot of scrolling up and down to try and find where that particular range of data is. So how can we make that simpler? Well, we can make that simpler by assigning a meaningful name to our cell range, which will make it a lot easier to identify straight off the bat. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's delete this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the bottom of this gross sales column. And again, just a quick navigation tip. If you have quite a long data set like I do here, if you want to quickly jump to the bottom, if you just press Control and then use your down arrow, it will jump you to the last row in your data set. So that's a nice little shortcut that I like to use. I'm not someone who uses loads and loads of shortcuts. I use sort of the 10 common ones that people use and the odd navigation one. And this is one of my favorites. I do like to use it wherever possible. All right, so at the bottom here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sum all of these gross sales. So again, I could go in there and I could use my cell range. So again, I could type in equals sum, I could open my bracket. I could click my bottom cell. Now, if I want to highlight everything all the way up, so that whole column essentially, I can do Control Shift up arrow, and that will highlight the whole lot. Okay. If I close my bracket, hit enter, you'll see that I now have my sum calculation at the bottom, and I've used my range in order to do that. So if you look in the formula bar, you can see it says sum G1 to G703. Now that works perfectly fine. There's absolutely no problem using cell references when you're doing calculations. But we're trying to make this a little bit more meaningful and a little bit easier for us to understand if we come back to this spreadsheet at a later date. So what I might do is something slightly different. So I'm going to delete that out. And I'm going to highlight this column again. So I'm going to do Control Shift up. I'm going to name this range. So I'm essentially just going to assign a name to this particular range of cells. And how do we name ranges? Well, fortunately, we have a name box in Excel, and you'll find the name box on the left-hand side. So it's kind of next to the formula bar. Currently, it's showing G703. This is your name box, and you'll see as I hover over it, I get that little screen tip there telling me that that is in fact my name box. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to give this cell range essentially a more meaningful name. And you can name these however you like. I'm just going to call this gross. Now, one important thing to remember here, and I always used to forget this when I was first learning Excel, is that in order to get that name to set or to take, you must press enter after you've entered it in, okay? If you just click away, it doesn't set it, so you need to press enter. So I now have that cell range named as gross. So how can that be useful to me? Well, it can be useful in a few different ways. Let me show you one way, which you may not be aware of. if you do have ranges named on your worksheet or in your workbook, you can use them to navigate. And again, this isn't a particularly large workbook. We just have 3 worksheets at the bottom. But again, imagine if you've got a workbook with loads and loads of worksheets and you might have to kind of jump around between different pieces of data, you can use named ranges to help you with that. So if I was on this Power Pivot tab at the bottom here, and I wanted to jump back to that gross column, I can use my drop down in the name box, and you can see I now have that name in there. And if I click it, it's going to jump me back to that particular cell range. So that's really, really useful. Of course, if I've named lots of different cell ranges on my page, I will find them all in here, and I can just select whichever one I want to use. So that's one way that it's useful to name your ranges for navigation. But let me show you another way. If I just jump back down to the bottom, so control down arrow. And again, I'm going to do that same formula that we did. So I'm going to sum that gross sales column, but this time I'm going to use the name of that range as opposed to the cell references. So I'm going to type in equals sum, open bracket. Now there's a couple of different ways that I can do this. So remember, I named my range gross. And if I can remember what I've named all of my ranges, which is quite straightforward in this example, but again, if I'm working on a spreadsheet where I've got loads and loads of different named ranges, I'm probably not going to remember them all. So I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can pull up your named ranges, depending on if you can remember them or not. So I know that my range is called gross. So if I want to sum it, I can just start to type in gross, and you'll see what Excel does. Underneath, it's picked up my table range name, or sorry, my range name just here. So I can just double click to select it, and you'll see that it automatically highlights that range above. And all I need to do is close my bracket, hit enter, and I get my answer. So let's jump back into there. So that immediately is a lot more meaningful when I look at that formula. Instead of just having sum and then G1 to G703, I now have gross. So if I come to this spreadsheet and I look at that calculation, I can say, okay, I know exactly what that's doing. It's summing that gross column. I don't have to try and figure out where those cell references are. Okay, so that is a really good reason to use range names as opposed to cell references. Let me show you the other way. So this is for people who can never remember anything, and I am one of those people. If I've got a lot of cell ranges, I can never remember what I've called them. So if I want to sum this range and I don't know that it's called gross, what I can do is I can press the F3 key on my keyboard. And what that will do is it will bring up any ranges that you've named. And that might just be cell ranges like we've done here, or it might be table ranges, which we're going to get onto in a moment. So it will list them all out there, and you can probably then make an educated guess as to which one you want to use. So I can do it in exactly the same way. Okay, so F3 is a really nice little shortcut to bring up all of your ranges, and it really helps if you can't remember what you've called them. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Give me a big yes or some kind of thumbs up in the chat panel. Yes, I can see I've got some questions coming in. As you know, it's quite hard for me to answer them when we're in the middle of the webinar, so just hold fire until the end and we will get to them. I've got lots of yeses, so I'm going to take that as a good thing. Let me just have a quick sip of coffee. I've got a really dry mouth today. Ah, that's better. Who's got a coffee? Hands up if you have a coffee or some kind of tea. Yes. Tea, Tamara says. I know. I should be having tea, shouldn't I? That's what we do in England. We drink tea. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Now, I've got my little gross named range in there. Now, you might be thinking, okay, if I go through my worksheet and I build up all of these different ranges, where do they all live? What if I want to go in and change the name of my range? Or what if I want to maybe adjust the cell references that that range is referring to? Where can I find all of my ranges? Well, again, fairly straightforward. Excel has a nice little area where all of your named ranges kind of get logged, so you can go back to them. And you'll find that on the formulas ribbon in this little section here, so where it says defined names, you have something called the name manager in there. And this is where all of your named ranges will live. And that, I mean all named ranges. So cell ranges and also table ranges. If you've named pivot tables, they will all appear in here. So this makes it pretty simple to manage them. So what we have here is we have our named range, gross. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. And if you look at the bottom, it's telling me which cells that particular range refers to. So it's telling me, if we just decipher what we've got in this little bar at the bottom, it's saying sales data. And you'll see that that is the worksheet tab that the range is located on. So my tab at the bottom is called sales data. We then have an exclamation point, and whenever you see that in this kind of formula, it's just a way of separating the worksheet name from the cell references. And then we actually have the cell range that that gross name refers to. So we've got G1 to G703, and you can see the dollar signs, which means that that is an absolute range. So if I wanted to, I could go in here and adjust the cell references if I wanted to, or I could click edit. And again, this is where I could change the name. So if I wanted to change it to gross sales or one word, I could do that. And again, I have the opportunity to select a different cell range if I want to, and even add a comment in there if I want to as well. So very simple to go in and edit your named ranges. You can also delete them from here. So if you add in some named ranges, then you decide you don't want them anymore, you can just click on delete to get rid of those. So quite simple. So named manager, or name manager I should say, is where you're going to find all of your named ranges. All right, now I am actually going to go in and I am going to delete this one. I'm going to delete that out and click on close. And you can see now that I've done that, I now have an error down here where my sum calculation was, because it's still referring to that named range, but I've now deleted it. So that's why I have an error. So I'm just going to go in and delete that out. All right, let's look at some other examples of naming ranges, because as I said, up here in this defined names group, we've looked at name manager, but we do have some other buttons in here. So let's take a look at what we can do with these. So I'm going to jump across to my ranges worksheet. And again, just a very small data set on here just to demonstrate this utility. I've got some items in this list. So this might be the budget for a household. So maybe these are my monthly expenses. So I have my rent and the amounts, utilities, council tax, cable TV, mobile phone, gym, and my all-important Netflix subscription. I think the most important thing on that list, because I couldn't live without Netflix, I don't think. Let me zoom in very slightly. Now, again, what I could do if I wanted to is name these different ranges. So if I wanted to do some calculations, maybe I wanted to work out how much the rent and the cable TV were going to be together. I could use named ranges for that instead. So I'm going to show you a different way of creating a named range. We saw previously how we did it, and let me just remind you, let's jump back to sales data. When I named a range before, I highlighted the range and then I typed the name into this name box. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, and this is quite good if you've got lots of different things that you want to name, is I could use this create from selection button at the top here. So what I want to do is essentially I want to name this value here, 700. I want to name that rent. I want to name this one utilities, this one council tax, so on and so forth. So I could go through, select it, and I could type it into this name box. That's perfectly valid. I could do that. It's a little bit tedious though, because I have to do them all separately. And again, if I've got a much longer list, that's going to take me quite a long time. So we're trying to do things efficiently in this session. So I'm going to show you a much quicker way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'll just show you with this first example. I'm just going to highlight where it says rent and 700. And I'm going to click create from selection. And what it says is create names from values in, and then it's asking me where I want to select it from. Now, I've got left column selected by default. And in this case, this is what I want. So essentially what this is saying is it's going to name this value 700 with whatever is in the left column, which in this case is rent. So that's what I want. So I'm going to click on OK. And now just to check that that has actually been named, if I click my drop down, you can see I have rent listed in there. So that's named that very quickly. Now I could do that for the rest of them, and I don't have to do them individually. I can select them all, click create from selection and say left column, click on OK, click my drop down, and now I have all of those named. So very quickly I've been able to name all of those ranges with very little fuss, very little hassle. And what I can do then is I could then use those names in calculations again. So again, we're just doing some very basic calculations, but just to show you, if I do sum, open bracket. So if I want to add the rent, remember I can do F3, bring up all of those names, and I can select rent. And I might want to say I want to add it to, let's do F3 again. I'm going to say add it to my mobile phone. There's my bracket. I'm sure if you can hear that siren, there's a police station next door to my house. Every few minutes I have a police car going by. Press enter. There we go. So again, if we look at that formula, it makes it a lot easier to understand. And again, imagine that you've got lots and lots of different things going on in your worksheet. I can look at this and I can think to myself, okay, it's summing the rent and the mobile phone. I don't have innocuous cell references that don't mean anything in there. It's made it a lot easier for me to understand. Okay, does that make sense to everybody so far? Yes, yes, yes. Someone said they're having problems with the audio. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, good. I was getting worried there. I did it from home once before and the audio was terrible. So I'm hoping it's just one person who's struggling a little bit, and I am sorry to that person, but okay, it's good. Lovely. All right, let's go back to our name manager. And again, just as an example, you can see now all of those ranges have been added to my name manager. So as I said, this is just a really nice way of being able to see all the ranges you've got set up and being able to edit them, modify them, do whatever you want with them. Lovely. All right. Now, so that's ranges. Let's move on to talking about tables, because tables are a slightly different beast, shall we say. And I'm going to jump back to my sales data spreadsheet. I'm going to jump up to the top. Now, at the moment, I don't have this data set in a table. And how do I know I don't have it in a table? Well, when I have it in a table, when I'm clicked inside the data set, one of the things I would notice is that I would have an additional ribbon at the top here, which would say Table Tools. Now, I can't see Table Tools up here, so that's a pretty good indication that I don't have my data in a table. So I'm going to put this in a table, and as I said, I've said this so many times on different webinars, I'm a massive fan of tables. I think they're so useful in so many different ways, and I am just going to demonstrate a few of the ways that you can use tables in this session today, and I will leave some more exploring on that topic down to you for later. So let's put this data in a table. Easy way to do it, just click anywhere inside your data. You don't have to highlight it all. Can just click inside, go to the home ribbon, and in the styles group we have an option here, format as table. And again, I've told this story a million times on other webinars, but I do find it quite funny that when I first started learning Excel, I really didn't know that this did anything in particular. I thought it was just a way of applying some nice formatting. I didn't really understand the full functionality of a table. So it always reminds me of that whenever I go to this little drop down. I'm going to select one of these styles. And again, it really doesn't matter what style you select. They're all tables. They just vary in their different styles. And you can hover over them and they all have different names. So you can go to town, select whichever one you like. Now, one interesting thing here is I currently don't have any formatting really on my data. It's just been typed into the spreadsheet. But you might have occasions where you do have data that already has some formatting on it. So maybe you have some, maybe your heading rows are bold and maybe the background's a different color. If you want to override the formatting that's on your data, before you apply your table style, if you right click, you have an option for apply and clear formatting. So what that will do is it will clear the current formatting out of your data and it will apply the new table style formatting. Okay, so that's one that you can use. It's good to know that that's there in that right click option. Now, I don't have any formatting, so I'm good just to click my style. And you can see, because I'm clicked within my data set, you can see the little marching ants or dancing ants, whatever you want to call them, around the outside. So it's worked out that this is going to be my data set. It's basically just looked at all of the data around where I'm clicked until it finds a blank area, and that's what it's selected as my data set. So again, if it happens to pick up the wrong data set, you can modify that just by clicking your arrow and reselecting, but in this case it's done it just fine. And I've got my table has headers is already ticked, and it's good to tick this if you do have headers in your table. So I'm going to click on OK. And there we go. My data is now in a table, and I can see that because obviously it looks kind of different. And what do we have at the top? We have the Table Tools ribbon. If I click outside of my data, that Table Tools ribbon disappears because it's no longer needed. That's the beauty of contextual ribbons in Excel, which came in 2010, I think it was. They started doing this whole contextual ribbon thing. They only appear when they're needed. So when I'm clicked in the table, this is where I'll find all of my table tools to format and do various other different things with my table. And we're going to look at that in a moment. Now, one other thing that will happen, let me just highlight my table data, is you'll see at the bottom here, I have this little pop-up, and if I hover over it, it says Quick Analysis. And this is also a useful little thing. When you do first put your data into a table, you will see this little tiny button at the bottom. And that's just a quick way of being able to quickly create something else based on this data. So normally, if you have a data set like this, you're probably going to do something else with it. You're not just going to put it in a table and leave it. You might decide you want to do some conditional formatting, or maybe you want to create a pivot table, or maybe you want to create a chart. This little drop down is just there to make that process a bit quicker for you. So you can see here, I could click it. If I wanted to create a chart, I can go in here and I can quickly select a chart that I might want to make. I might want to do some calculations. I might want to do a pivot table, something along those lines. So don't forget about your little quick analysis button that pops up when you highlight your table data. All right, now one other thing I'm going to do in here, I'm going to jump up to the Table Tools Design ribbon, and this is a fairly straightforward ribbon. You've got your table stars at the end here, so if I want to change the color, I can. I've got some table style options, and I've got a few things ticked in here, such as header row, which I can toggle that off and on if I want to. Banded rows, this is all to do with sort of how this formatting looks. So again, if I turn off banded rows, it just takes off that formatting. I can highlight different columns. I can do banded columns as well. If I do that, it looks a little bit crazy. I don't particularly like that. And also we have the filter button. Now this is one other reason why I really like tables, is that when you put your data in a table, it will automatically give you these filter buttons at the top. And I do love a filter, it has to be said. It's such a great way of just being able to extract out of your data information that's relevant to you. So again, if I click that drop down, if I just wanted to see all of the sales data for maybe North America, so Mexico and the United States, I could click on OK. And I can very quickly and easily filter that data. And if I wanted all of the Mexicos together, I could go in and do a sort A to Z, Z to A, whatever I wanted to do. I'm going to clear that filter. And I think I have another filter applied. Do I? No, I've just got my sorting applied. That's fine. So you can see there, you have those little filter buttons applied at the top of each column. Now, I find them super useful. However, if you don't use them or you just find they're getting in the way, you can untick that filter button and it will get rid of those filters at the top there. So that's entirely up to you. We have some other options. We can export the data, we can refresh it, which we're going to do in a minute. And then we have a tools group just here. So we've got some options here: summarize with pivot table, remove duplicates, and convert to range. Now, these are all quite important and we are going to utilize all of these. Now, the first one I'm going to utilize is this remove duplicates button. Once you do have your data in a table, if you want to check to see if there's any duplicates in there, you can just quickly use that button. So if I click remove duplicates, it selects my entire table range and it's asking me, what do you want me to check for duplicates? So in this case, I want to check that the entire row is a duplicate. So that means that everything, the order number, the order date, the country, product, everything is duplicated. And so I have everything ticked in here. If I just wanted to check for country duplicates, I can untick everything and just leave country checked, and it will check, and it would find a lot because you can see we've got lots of Canadas, lots of Mexicos, so on and so forth. But I don't want to get rid of those. I just want anything that's an exact duplicate. So maybe something that's been accidentally copied, so on and so forth. So I'm going to say OK. And it says it's found 2 duplicate values and it's removed them, and we have 700 unique values remaining. So that's a nice little tool to use in your data as well. Let me just take another swig of coffee, bear with me. That's better. All right. Now I've got my data in this table. What I want to do is I'm going to name my table. So this is getting back to that whole naming convention thing again. Now, again, on this Table Tools design ribbon, if you look right across in the left-hand column, we have table name. And currently it says table 1, which again is fine, but it's pretty meaningless. If I'm going to refer to this table in another worksheet, table 1 doesn't mean a great deal to me. It doesn't tell me anything about the data that's in that table. And if I just go through naming my tables, table 1, table 2, table 3, that's going to get really confusing if I'm trying to refer to them. So I'm going to give this table a more meaningful name. So I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to click in table name and I'm going to call this orders. And remember, hit enter. Let's just double check. So in the drop down, let's just make sure we've got all of our ranges that we named previously, and we have orders at the bottom there. So as I said, I could use that for navigating. So again, if I was over here, if I select orders, it's going to jump me back to that entire data range. So now that I have that, I'm going to use this again in a formula, and I'm going to show you it in a slightly different way. So let me go up to the top, and I'm going to add in a column. So I'm going to say insert, and I'll give it a name in a moment. Let me just make it a bit wider because we are going to type a little formula in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what we call a calculated column that shows the amount if we applied a 15% discount to the gross sales in here. And this could be any calculation. It really doesn't matter too much. It's really the technique that I'm trying to show you. So what I'm going to say is equals sum. I'm going to open my bracket. Now I can reference my table. You'll see here, if I type in a square bracket, so I did that a bit quick, let me do that again, equals sum. I'm doing my regular open bracket or parentheses. If I follow that up with a square bracket, what Excel does is it shows me all of the columns within that table. So you can see there, order number, order date, country, product, so on and so forth. So it's automatically, just by the fact that I've named this table, it's picked up all of those headers and it's made ranges for me, which is really amazing. I haven't had to do that. It's done it for me. So if I want to work out, I'm doing the gross sales. So I want to work out what 15% is of the gross sales. I'm going to select gross sales. I'm going to close my square bracket, and you can see it's highlighted that column. And I'm just going to do multiplied by 15%. As I said, the calculation in this instance doesn't matter too much. And close my bracket and hit enter. What you can see is it's worked it out and it's automatically copied it all the way down. It hasn't just put it in one cell. I haven't had to auto fill down. Because we're in a table, it automatically adds it in for me. And I'm just going to put in here discounted, something like that. You can use whatever you like. As I said, not worrying too much about the intricacies of the formula, just so you can see how you can utilize column names once you've created a table. So square brackets, it will pull them up, select the one you want, and away you go. And again, that's much more meaningful. I can see that that is the sum, the gross sales multiplied by 15%. All right, lovely. Does that make sense? Are you all still with me, or are you asleep? Tony's put, love that. I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, you're all still with me. Lovely. Thanks, guys. All right, let's move on, shall we? Let's do something slightly more complicated, along the same vein, though. I'm going to scroll across and just show you how you can utilize that again in a slightly different formula. So I'm going to make a little bit of room just here. Let me just zoom in. So again, on that same vein, I'm just going to show you it in a slightly different way using a sum-if calculation. And we're going to use a couple of different columns in this calculation. So what I'm going to work out, and if you've never used sum-if before, that's a really handy little formula to look up and learn. What we're basically saying with a sum-if is we're saying, okay, only sum the gross sales in this case, where the country is Canada. So we're only going to get a sum of all of the sales when the country equals Canada. And that's where we would use a sum-if. So I'm going to say equals sum-if, open bracket. Now this time, because I'm outside of my table, I'm going to tell it the table that I want to use. And again, you could use your F3 key to pull it up. You could just start to type in the name. And I can see there, we've got orders. I'm then going to tell it which column I want. So remember that square bracket will bring up your columns, and I'm going to say country. I'm going to close my bracket. And you'll see underneath it says range. So all we've said so far is in the table orders, in the country column. So we're going to say where the country column, and we've got the criteria which we need next, equals Canada essentially. And remember, anytime you're typing text into a formula, it needs to go into quote marks. So it's going to look for I keep going to say calendar. It's going to look for Canada in the country column in the orders table, comma. And it's saying, okay, once I've found Canada, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to sum the gross sales, okay? So again, I'm going to say in the orders table, and you can probably see where we're going with this, square bracket, gross sales, close my square bracket. And then I need to do a final parentheses just to finish that off like so. Okay, so let's just review that. So we've got sum-if, orders where the country equals Canada. When it finds Canada, we're going to sum the gross sales. Okay, and let's hit enter. And there we go. So again, if we go back into that, it's a lot more meaningful. If you look up in the formula bar, it's a lot easier to understand. We're summing in the table orders, the country column, we're looking for Canada, and it's the gross sales that we're summing. Imagine that without those names in. You just have a whole host of cell references, which you would have to sit there and kind of think, okay, what am I looking at here? It just makes everything a lot more meaningful to use names within a table. All right, so just another little way you can use those. Lovely. Let's click on Leap. Okay, a couple of other little tips and tricks. Now, again, once you do have your data in a table, if you scroll down, so I'm going to just scroll down like so, you can see my headers disappear, but what actually happens is they now appear at the top here. So if you do scroll down, you can always see your headers because they become essentially the column headings. Now that only happens if you're in a table. So again, that's another little advantage of using a table. You don't have to do any kind of freeze panes or anything like that. It automatically happens, so you can always see which column that you're looking at when you scroll down, which I think is really, really nice. Now, I always say this when we're talking about tables. This is one of the things I love about tables, and that is their ability to automatically expand to accommodate new data. And this is a question I get a lot, particularly when I'm training something like pivot tables. So you might have a data set like this, and we are going to create a quick pivot table in a moment. You might create a pivot table off of this data set, but then maybe next month, you've got some more data to add into that data set. And people will say, well, do I have to go in and update every single table or pivot table or chart that I've created to accommodate the new data? Well, yes, you would if you didn't have your data in a table. If you do put your data in a table, it will automatically expand to accommodate any new data that you add to it. And in effect, that makes it a lot easier for anything that hangs off of that table, be it a chart or a pivot table or whatever it is, to be updated. So I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. Let's do control down, jump to the bottom. And we've got just over 700 rows in this data. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly going to add a new row of data, and I'm just going to actually sort of copy. Am I right at the end there? No, I'm not. Okay. I'm just going to copy this down. So I'm just going to drag it down. I'm just going to change this order number to 508. And I'm just going to copy the rest of this data down for argument's sake. I'm just going to use the drag handle like so. Now, can you see I've added that? But it automatically became part of the new table. I didn't have to go in and change the table range in order to get it to accommodate that. It's already become part of that particular table. So if I have pivot tables referring to this table range, that's automatically going to be included in my pivot table. So I'm going to show you an example so you can see and be very clear on exactly how this works. So let's click in our data and let's create a quick pivot table. My favorite thing in the world, as anybody knows. I'm going to go to the insert ribbon and I'm going to go up to, I'm going to just do a recommended table. I do like this button. If you're not used to pivot tables, it's a really nice way of just having Excel kind of do all the hard work for you. Excel kind of looks at your data and recommends you different pivot tables that you might want to use. So I'm just going to use this one, which is showing me the sum of profit by country. So it's just going to show me all of the different countries and the total sum of all of the profit. So that's fine in this example. I'm just going to click on OK. And it automatically creates that pivot table for me. Now I'm just going to name my sheet just so I know what I'm doing. Again, when it comes to tables and ranges, you could go in and name your pivot table. So if I wanted to name this pivot table, you'll see I have pivot table tools tabs at the top. And on the Analyze tab, I could name my pivot table. So I could go in and say this one's called Fit. It's nice to get into the habit of naming everything on your page because then you can just refer to things very, very easily. Now, I'm not going to do a great deal with this pivot table because this isn't a pivot tables training session. What I'm trying to demonstrate to you is how it will update automatically. So to do that, I'm going to enter a quick pivot chart. So let's just do a very basic one like so. And we're just going to put that just there. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some data into my data set so you can see how the table automatically expands and how easy it then is to update not only this table, but also this chart with the click of one button. Okay, so let's go back to our sales data. Let's jump down to the bottom. And I'm just going to add, again, I'm not going to be too clever with this. I'm just going to add or drag this down a little bit, which isn't going to make much sense with regards to the data, but just so we get some additional data in there. What you'll see now is that I've added a whole new load of rows. Now, these are all underneath the country United States. So this is what I want you to look for. Now, when I click off, you'll see that that data is still part of this table. And because both of these are created off of that table range, all I need to do is click the refresh button. So keep your eye on United States sum of profit just here, because you should see that change to accommodate that new data. And you'll also see this. It will only be a very slight change because I haven't added very much data, but the chart should change as well. So let's go to Analyze, and you'll see we have a refresh button. And can you see that increased? And this increased slightly as well. So that's all I've had to do. And that is all I will ever have to do if I have pivot tables and charts hanging off of my data. Okay, so that is another great reason why you should use tables, particularly when you're going to do things like analyzing that data using pivot tables. Just makes it so much easier to update everything in one click. Lovely. All right, let's talk about something slightly different now. If I go back to my sales data, one thing to remember with this as well is that you do have some other really nice utilities. So on the Table Tools design ribbon, in this little tools group, we've looked at how you can add a pivot table. We've looked at remove duplicates. I'm going to come back to convert to range in a moment, but you also have the option to insert slicers. And again, these are another little tool that I love, and people tend to associate these with pivot tables. They're not only for pivot tables, you can just use them on a regular table of data like this one that we have here. And what these are is they're essentially filters, if you've never come across them before, but they're a really nice visual way of filtering your data. So I could add a slicer for this data. I could say I want to add a country slicer and maybe a year slicer. If I click OK, I get these two little panels, which I can then place wherever I like, and I can format these a little bit because I do have a slicer tools ribbon as well. So I can change the way these look. For example, if I wanted to change the color, I could go in and change the colors of these. I could also change the way this is laid out. So again, currently I have this as one column. I could change it to two just to get it to display slightly differently. And I can use these, I can click on them. So if I just want to see all of the data for Canada, I can click on Canada and I only see the details for Canada. Or if I wanted to select two, I could hold down my control key and select Canada and Mexico. Maybe I only want to see it for the year 2016. And it's just a really nice visual way of being able to filter my data. And these can look really good, particularly if you have them on sort of like a nicely designed dashboard. So don't forget that you have those slicers for regular tables as well. And I'm just going to clear both of those filters. All right, so a really, really nice way of using those as well. Okay, let's jump back to, I'm going to go to this little Power Pivot area just here. Now, you may not be aware of Power Pivot and Power Query. And again, we have done a webinar on this. It was quite a long while ago. If you're not aware of what those two terms are, basically Power Pivot or Power Query in a sense, they both work together. Is a way of, or they're a great way if you have a lot of data. So for example, if you have an extremely large data set that you want to put into a pivot table, Power Pivot is a great way of doing that. It's able to handle extremely large data sets a lot better than just a regular pivot table is. Sometimes when you have, and I'm talking about very large data sets here, sometimes with pivot tables, if the data set is very, very large, it starts to get quite slow when you're doing things, whereas Power Pivot is kind of built to accommodate extremely large data sets. And what it also allows you to do is Power Pivot and Power Query work together. There's a utility within Power Query which will allow you to do things like clean data. So again, we've run webinars on that before, some different ways that you can kind of clean up messy data. So Power Query kind of allows you to import data, clean it up, and then kind of load it, and you can combine lots of different pivot tables together. Now, I'm not going to go into that too much, but I just want to show you sort of a basic example because it does relate to sort of tables and things like that. Now, the data that I've got here, again, is just some basic sales data, and I'm just going to name this, sorry, I'm going to put this into a table. It's currently not, so I'm going to go to Home, I'm going to go to Format as Table, and I'm going to select just the blue one again. It's picked up my data range. I'm going to say, yes, my table has headers, and I'm going to click on OK. So it's now put my data into a table, and I'm going to go straight in and I'm going to name that table. So again, up in my table name area, I'm going to call this products and hit enter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of Power Query for this. Now I'm going to click in my data and I'm going to go to the data ribbon. And I'm going to say, get data from table range. And the Power Query editor will load. So this will probably be a window that you're not familiar with. It's kind of like external to your Excel worksheet. And this is actually Power Query. And as I said, if this looks interesting to you, then this is definitely something to look up. And we have done a webinar on this before. This is kind of imported that data into this Power Query window where we can now go through and use the Power Query utilities to kind of do things like clean up the data. Now, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I just wanted to kind of show you how you can, if you've got data in a table, you can import it into Power Query. If you don't have it in a table, then you can't do that, okay? So you need to have your data in a table. Now I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm just going to highlight the month columns. And again, I'm not going to get too much into this because it's not a Power Query training session. I'm going to apply some basic formatting to this. I'm going to go to the Transform tab and I'm going to use this thing here called Unpivot Columns, which will essentially change the way that I'm viewing my data. So that's all I wanted to do. I've changed the way that I'm viewing my table essentially. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Home and I'm going to load it back into Excel. So if I click Close and Load To, and it does take a few seconds sometimes for this to pop up, it's now saying, okay, where do you want me to load it to? So I'm going to say I want a new table. I want it on the existing worksheet, and I want you to put the table just here in cell B12. And click on OK. And again, this can take a little while. Just going to close that window down. So now it's imported that data with the changes that I made. So I just pivoted those columns. So I now have my months showing down, and it's given me another table with my data displayed in a different way. There are lots of different things I could have done with that data in that Power Query window, lots of different cleanup options. My point here is that you must have your data in a table prior to doing that, and then it will export it out into a table as well. Now this is going off into a whole host of different topics like creating relationships between tables and using multiple pivot tables. Again, that's really an entire other session which we have done previously. So I will kind of leave that for you to have a little play around with. I did just want to show you that though, because it's probably something you haven't seen and a little bit different, and another way that tables can be super, super useful. The final thing before we end, and again, this is a really common question that I get, is let me jump back to, where are we? Sales data. A lot of people say, once I've got my data in a table, like I have here, what if I want to take it out of the table? What do I do? Well, this is very simple, but not immediately obvious on your, on your ribbon. What you need to do is I'm going to highlight my data, and on my Table Tools Design ribbon, in this tools group, there is Convert to Range button. So this will convert this table into a normal range of cells. So it essentially takes it out of the table. So if I click Convert to Range, it says, do you want to convert the table to a normal range? I select yes. And it's now back to a normal range. And sometimes people get confused because it keeps the formatting of the table. So it sort of still looks like it's in the table, but it's actually not. You'll see now I'm clicked in the table, but I don't have my Table Tools menu at the top. Okay, so this is now working as just the normal range and not as a table. All right, so a few little tips and tricks there. Wow, that did nearly take an hour. I was thinking this will be done in half an hour, but no. Everything always takes an hour. That's pretty much all I wanted to show you guys. Have you learned any quick tips and tricks there? Let me know if you learned something. I always like to know, you know, even if it was just one thing, I will feel I've been justified. Yes, yes, even if it's just one shortcut. Amazing. Okay, great. What I'll do now is I will open it up to some questions. So let me just jump across to the Q&A panel. Let's have a look. So Robert, this is a great question. Once you've created some slices, if you refresh the pivot table, are they applied since slices reflect? No, they're not. They're not. I tried this yesterday actually because I had the same question. I was thinking, if I've applied slices and then I refresh my pivot table, do they affect it? No, they don't. It just works on the underlying table data. Is there a reason to not place my data into a table? Oh, that's a great question. I wouldn't say there's a reason not to do it. I can only think of reasons why you should do it. I mean, I guess if you're not thinking of using your data for any type of analysis or anything like that, then yeah, you don't have to put it into a table. I always find it's useful because just by effect putting it into a table, I get things like filters, which I can then use. So I always find it useful to put it into a table, but you know, you don't have to. It really depends what you plan to do with that data. Tonya, can you link the old webinar session for Power Query, Power Pivot for us? Maybe in the email we'll get. Yes, I will absolutely put that into the email that goes out. Lovely. All right. I think that's all of the questions that we have. That's fairly quick and easy. So I will leave it there, guys, and I will let you go. I do have some bad news for you, actually. I hate to break this to you. Let me just go on to this slide. Yeah, so next week is going to be the last webinar ever. I'm afraid it's the conditional formatting bootcamp. Now, I know this is really sad actually because I've been doing these for 3 years with you guys, and unfortunately they've decided to, I know people are like, no, I know, that was my reaction when I heard as well. The reason why, I mean, this may come as a little bit of a surprise to you guys. I've actually known this is probably coming for quite a while. The reason why is because the company that I do these for, so that is Excel with Business Filtered and Skillsology, they're kind of shifting their focus away from online courses and into different products. They're doing a lot of work with AI and learning recommendations. They have a whole bunch of new products, which kind of all of the money and all the resources are going into that. So whilst the courses are still going to be available and they'll still be up to date for people to buy, they're actually sort of trying to cut costs a little bit, I think. So they have told me that we're stopping the webinar. So I was a little bit like, that's not great. So yeah, unfortunately, next week is going to be the last one, and it's on conditional formatting boot camp, which will be fun. But yeah, I'm really going to miss doing these because it's sort of been quite a little journey we've all had over the last 3 years through Excel. I am thinking at some point, possibly because I am freelance, maybe starting these up again if people are interested. I don't know. I need to see if I want to do these sort of, everyone's like, yes! So we shall see. So I will say stay tuned for that. And I know so many disappointed people. I know I'm disappointed as well, but unfortunately, it's not really my decision. I can only have the work if they decide to give it to me. So, and they won't be getting anybody else in either to do these. They are actually just stopping altogether. So, yeah, that's really unfortunate. So I will leave you with that sad thought, and I will be back with you next week, as I said, for the final webinar after 3 years, conditional formatting boot camp. I hope you have an amazing day wherever you are in the world, wherever you're calling in from, and I will speak to you guys next week. Have an amazing day. Bye.